The Senate Committee on Energy Utilities and Communications, Subcommittee on Clean Energy Future will come to order. Good morning. As we continue to take some precautions to manage ongoing COVID-19 risks, the Senate continues to welcome the public and has provided access to both in-person and teleconference participation for public comment. For individuals wishing to provide public comment via the teleconference service, the participant toll-free number and access code is posted on our committee website. It will be displayed on the screen, and I will announce it now. Today's participant number is 1-844-291-6364, 1-844-291-6364, and the access code is 141-1140. I'll maintain decorum during the hearing as is customary, and any individual who is disruptive may be removed from the remote meeting service or have their connections muted. All of our representatives today will be participating remotely. For our remote participants, please mute your phones or computers. This will greatly aid in eliminating any acoustic feedback. I ask that every time you wish to be recognized that you use the raise your hand feature in the program. Each time you recognize to speak, a pop-up window will appear asking if you'd like to unmute. Please select unmute before you begin speaking. Our IT personnel will put you back on mute when you are done. Once recognized to speak, please make sure you can be seen on the screen, state your name, and then you're ready to address the committee. For today's hearing, we will be hearing all of our panels of witnesses on the agenda prior to taking any public comment. Once we've heard all of our witnesses, we will have a public comment period for those who wish to comment on topics on today's agenda. Today's hearing aims to understand what California needs to have a clean, renewable grid that is also reliable for its residents. This summer, multiple entities have predicted that California's grid could be vulnerable to energy shortfalls in the case of extreme heat waves. We will hear more from their representatives on this issue soon. But first, our goal is to understand why we are in this situation. Despite what you will hear on Fox News, the cause of potential shortfalls is not reliance on renewable energy. Meeting our goals of 100% clean electricity by 2045 is still the key component in fighting climate change and in preventing these weather conditions in the first place. Today's hearing will lay out why California is finding ourselves in this situation. The decline of hydropower, the extreme heat affecting neighboring states and our regional imports, and the delays on new installation from the pandemic. This issue will not become easier to solve in the future. In fact, climate change is anticipated to make these summer conditions more intense and frequent, meaning more heat waves, less hydropower, increases in wildfires threatening transmission lines year after year. That's why we need to be acting now to support current agency and entity planning and resource deployment to ensure California's grid isn't threatened from extreme climate conditions every summer. We have the ability to improve the grid's reliability with a variety of tools that will be discussed today. And this is what we're calling kind of a policy toolkit of sorts. Is meant to add urgency, attention, and hopefully encourage efforts to engage and proactively support technology and policy solutions to improving reliability. The potential for blackouts is a troubling prospect. We need to figure this out now because Californians are deeply reliant on a consistent, uninterrupted stream of electricity to hospitals, schools, emergency services, all need uninterrupted power. So what we'll do now is hear from our first presenter to understand better the risks and why we are in this situation. Our first presenter, we're fortunate to have the Chief Operating Officer of the California Independent System Operator, Mark Rothletter, who will be testifying remotely. Welcome, Mr. Rothletter.
Good morning, Senator Becker. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for convening this hearing on a very important subject. I will be brief in describing, from my perspective, what's happening in the grid and the challenges facing the grid at this point. I'll start off by saying that I've been with the California ISO for 25 years. The last probably 12 years, I've been involved in integrating and helping transform the grid to a clean and reliable and affordable energy grid. But I will say that in the last few years, we've seen this transformation, the pace of transformation increase. And as a result of that pace of transformation, we've seen a variety of things that have occurred. One is the load shapes have changed. When demand peaks and when supply is available has changed. And typically in previous years, it's been, you always talk about the peak, kind of 4 to 5 p.m., and that was been the most challenging period. That has shifted, and that's as a result of the really the progress we've made in bringing additional solar resources to bear. But the challenge is that the solar production does not continue after around 6 to 8 p.m. And as a result of that, the demand for energy still continues to exist in that later evening hours. So while we can say that we've actually met some of the majority of the load growth with bringing on solar resources, that load still exists and actually comes back onto the system to be needing to be served later in the evening. And that's what we call the net peak period. And that's been the most challenging period of late. And indeed, in the August 2020 events, that is when that we had the most challenging issues. Solar coming down, wind very low because of the hot temperatures, and that became the most challenging issues. I will say that this transformation was expected, and in fact, resource planning and resources being added to the system were authorized to start to lean into this transformation. But I will say that because of climate change effects and other effects, the pace and the dynamic changes have been more intense than what the new resources could keep up with. So what are those additional changes that have occurred that have been more intense? One is what we've experienced is west-wide extreme weather events. And during west-wide extreme weather events, our normal ability to access energy from outside, surplus energy from outside, really decreases. And we've seen the situation where it's been hot across the West, the availability of supply to come into California has significantly decreased in those periods. Second is the significant change with the amount of the results of drought condition, a persistent drought condition, and that's decreased our ability to use the hydro system and the availability of energy in the hydro system. Thirdly, we've continued to see effects as a result of wildfire risk. And the wildfire risk is really obviously has significant impacts on public, but also it has impacts on the transmission system. And to the extent that the availability of the transmission system is impacted, being able to import supplies of energy, that becomes a new component of climate change risk. This is something that we experienced in 2021 with the Boot Lake fire in Southern Oregon, where we were cut off from about 3,000 to 4,000 megawatts of transfer capability at the most critical time during a hot summer peak condition. So that's a new element of risk that we're facing. And then lastly, we are experiencing challenges with COVID and other effects of supply chain, which not only really affects the new resources coming on the system and the availability and the ability to integrate and bring those new resources on in a timely manner. So as I stated before, there's a significant amount of resource development that has been authorized by the CPUC, about Between the first tranche, about 3,300, and another 11,500 megawatts of additional capacity by 2026, roughly. As a result, what we've looked at, and we've looked at it in the last, for this summer and going forward, we've looked at now what the expected capacity will be on the system, and with the changes of conditions, with the higher load conditions, as well as the drought conditions, and continued retirement of resources, what we've observed is that we are not meeting what we call our 1 in 10 reliability or expected. Let me back up. Our 1 in 10 year event criteria, which is basically says one event in 10 years, you would want to have less than one event in 10 years where you have insufficient supply. The systems are not designed that you can guarantee that there will never be a shortfall for all conditions, covering all statistical outliers. But what we try to target is a reliability level of this 1 in 10 year event. And what we've observed doing statistical analysis is that we have not achieved that 1 in 10 year level criteria. And in fact, we're about 1,700 megawatts short of achieving that criteria this year. Now, we are continuing to bring on resources to hopefully close that gap in future years. But then we get another dynamic that comes into play around 2024 and 2025, and that is we will have a additional retirement of additional resources, including Diablo Canyon and the once through cooled resources. And that would put us, if looking out in the future to 2025, based on the expected trajectory of procurement that has been authorized, we will actually still have a gap of about 1,800 megawatts of capacity to meet that 1 in 10 year criteria. This doesn't account for more extreme level events. And so that's why we're looking for additional reserves and capability to cover more extreme weather events, fire risk events, and the new element is can we build all those resources and get them online in time in the next few years? And with the supply chain risk, as I mentioned earlier, there is significant risk that there could be delays, putting that even 1,800 megawatt shortfall at risk. So the question at hand is, well, what can we be doing? And I think the answer is, one is we need to continue to build, but we need to build and have based on a diverse set of resources that have firm dispatchable capability. And we should need the diversity piece of this comes back from if you just rely on a single set of resources, whether it be solar or solar plus batteries, a single technology battery storage, you may be in a situation where you're over-relying on, again, supply chains that may be at risk. So at this point, you need to broaden and diversify the mix of resources and make sure that those clean resources have a ability to be dispatched when needed for system conditions. So I think the last thing I'd like to say is that as we do this as we continue this transition and we are expecting the retirements, we need to make sure that the new resources are both installed and available and operating as expected before we let additional resources go that are critical to reliability. And so that brings up the consideration of how do we make this transition work and what other things do we need to consider as we continue this transformation. There are some abilities to look at different types of technologies, including demand response, other technologies of storage, and a broader set of renewable resources, including geothermal and other clean resources to broaden that mix of and spread out the diversity and spread out that risk. With that, I will stop here and I'll see if there's any questions regarding my comments today.
Thank you very much. And just to recap quickly, you talked about the West-wide extreme weather events, drought conditions, wildfire risks, and COVID and other effects on supply chain as reasons that have hindered our ability now to have reliability, and those are really the causes of the risk of blackouts, and that you try to prepare for this kind of 1 in 10 year event and not achieved that yet because of those other reasons, about 1,700 megawatts short. And talked a little bit about some of what we can do. I'll have a couple thoughts on that, but I wanted to first turn it over to my colleagues to ask any questions. And if you want to, I know Senator Stern, you also had some kind of opening remarks you wanted to make as well.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe I'll just work what my sentiments at the outset. We're going to be into a question for Mr. Rothleader as well. I'm really glad you're holding this hearing, and I just want to dig into details today. I mean, that's why this subcommittee's here, and in that sense, we have really good people to just show what kind of megawatts they can bring online fast. And that's the situation we're in. And we just want to make sure that the marketplace we're working in California, and the intent we have is to actually give all these technologies and all these companies an ability to compete at a very exciting time. And this is going to be, these next few years will be an inflection point in the grid in not just California, but the whole country. The financing is there. The demand certainly is there for us to perform at both a political level. The people are counting on for us to deliver and not go back to the ways of the past and not fall into the German dynamic where you have a gas-dependent system and you find yourself leveraged into some very scary politics. And more than politics, we're looking at a war right now globally because people didn't plan ahead on how they're going to manage their grid. Luckily, we don't have Russia as our next-door neighbor here in California. But that same vulnerability for a failure to plan ahead and for a blind reliance on technologies of the past and for fossil generation and other outdated tech that, by the way, lives in all the environmental justice communities in California, to just have to lean back on that to solve this problem seems very un-Californian. And I think we can, in how we approach these gaps, both in the near term, between now and 2025, and in the medium term, say between now and 2030, I think we can show the world how it actually gets done. And I think the world can learn a lot. And I think, most importantly, the ratepayers and the people of California can save some money and just keep their lights on. My question for Mr. Rothleader is about the ability for two sectors that are alternatives to turning on gas OTC or peaker systems or fossil energy or nuclear power as a stopgap for what we're looking, for the gap we're looking at on those hot September evenings out in 2025. My understanding is that there's currently a cap on demand response at the PUC, that there's a proceeding that hasn't been completed for a number of years, and that the way even the legislature currently has drafted our framework, that if you're merely in a territory that's eligible for an IOU demand response program, just eligible, that you're not enrolled in one, but just that you're eligible for that program, that all the third parties are essentially boxed out of that market. So if the PUC decided to take action on demand response in terms of how they look at the capacity value of that resource, as well as this eligibility question and some of the other caps in current law, has ISO sort of projected out how many megawatts you think could come out of these newer demand response programs? how much could come online. And the caveat I would say is the last time we asked industry for their help and their demand response, and that was at a gubernatorial level, lo and behold, we found a gigawatt in a day. We have not codified that kind of program yet, or we've not put that into place or formalized it. But how much more demand response do you think we could get online if some of those pending reforms were adopted?
Yeah, I don't know exactly how much would be potential. I can say that in August of 2020 and again in 2021, when we really asked for the public to respond and reduce their demand, we did see approximately 2,000 to 3,000 megawatts of additional conservation and relief. Now, how that relief was coming about, whether there was potentially some backup generators or storage that was starting up, it's not quite clear. But I know that the California Public Utilities Commission has adopted and tried to get some additional emergency load relief programs in place. I think that has been adding at least about 800 megawatts to the existing demand response capability. But I will say that the demand response capability is probably in one of the areas of untapped potential in the system. But that demand response capability needs to be something that we either have a measurable response of how much it's actually expected to reduce the load, so we can understand that from a load modification perspective, or we have those programs available for dispatch by the market when needed. Looking forward, I will say, and this is something that is a real opportunity, as you electrify the system and you decarbonize and electrify, let's say, mobility with cars or heating or cooling, there is new opportunities to actually have what is going to be new demand increasing in the future. That is real opportunity to actually, if you can manage that new demand and be able to control it and reduce it when you have these extreme types of events, that is a new opportunity as we transform other sectors and electrify the other sectors away from other fuels. So
I appreciate that feedback, and I guess I would be curious, in light of the governor's goals on, I think it's climate healthy and climate friendly homes, and even just stacking the decarb goals, if they're achieved by what the governor himself has projected, along with the administration's ZEV goals, how much demand response capacity with all those sort of the new smartness of our homes, essentially the two-way street that becomes energy now. How much can we project, and by when? And starting to, the market shifts so quickly, right? The IRA just passed. Now it's going to be this renaissance in building decarbonization and in the ZEV fleet that we didn't anticipate. How can you update your planning quickly enough to play catch up to all this exciting, these developments?
Yeah, I agree with you. And you need to update the planning, and I think you also have to make sure that there are proper incentives and price signals so that those new loads and those smart devices are responding to a set of price signals that are actually responsive to actual system conditions. If you have an inconsistent price signal with a very smart device, you may be losing the effectiveness of those new opportunities.
Yeah, agreed. And my last line of questioning, Mr. Chair, if you'll indulge me, in another resource sector, so in the sort of renewables and storage space, or the sort of clean, dispatchable, zero carbon energy arena. My understanding is that there's a fair amount of capacity out there available to come online and feed our grid, but for interconnection challenges. And so whether it's the actual transmission upgrades themselves or just the contracting models around this kind of power, how much is sort of in queue, if you will, or sort of just waiting to be switched on out there, that because of either our market rules under the RPS or because of actual physical constraints, how much is out there right now that we could switch on in the, say, next 2 years?
So I think there's two components to what's available in the next 2 years. One is, this is what I mentioned about supply chain, and there is in the near term, there's well over probably 3 to 5 gigawatts of transmission capability that really you could get interconnections on if you do it in the right places, the right locations, and they're already in the request queue in the right locations. If you develop those resources, if you can find the supply chain, there's really not an interconnection issue. In the longer term, yes, we will need to have additional transmission developed, and we will have to streamline the permitting and interconnection processes. There's not a shortage of projects in the longer term demand. There's over 40 gigawatts of resources that have applied for interconnection.
I'm sorry, did you say 240 gigawatts?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So there's plenty of resources wanting to interconnect to the system, more than what we would need for the transformation. The question that is really the challenging is making sure that those resources that are wanting to get or wanting to come and to get developed, one, you can find interconnection, the right place, right location, or you develop some additional transmission to support those. Two, you need contracting and power purchase agreements, because without power purchase agreements, these projects will not move forward, and they're just clogging up the queue waiting for power purchase agreements. You got to clear that out by actually getting procurement to actually get these resources actually procured and developed. And then thirdly, you need to solve the supply chain issues and align the supply chain issues, overcome those to make sure those resources that can be developed, have the supply chain, are in the right location, are the ones getting contracted, and are moving forward. And that is the challenge, of how do you coordinate all those dynamic pieces to come together to get to an efficient development and interconnection outcome. It's not just interconnection; it's all three of those things.
And my understanding from the PUC president's testimony last week before Energy Committee, that's partly what the role of, I'm going to mess up the name, TED? No, is it?
Yes, yeah. The TED task force is exactly trying to do that coordination, trying to do that matchmaking and ensure that those resources that are in the best position are the ones that are getting, hopefully getting contracted. And if there are supply chain issues, they start to understand what the supply chain issues are and try to overcome those to, again, do as I just said, try to coordinate and make sure that those resources that have the supply chain, have the interconnection capability, are the ones that are moving forward and keep moving forward and get contracted. That's probably the last key, is those are the ones that are getting contracted. It makes no sense to contract with a resource, even though it may be cheaper, if it doesn't have the supply chain and interconnection capability.
But what we're talking about here is new projects to come online and coordination. But I guess my earlier question, and I want to make sure I'm understanding this, that I thought there was capacity that doesn't need any supply chain work, that because of just how it's treated, say, under the RPS, because it's out of state, for example, or in a different marketplace, that kind of interconnection isn't happening, and that is available, and that the market is going to offer it to us, but we're not taking it.
There are projects out there, both I'd say in-state and out-of-state. You need to have contracts with those resources,
right,
and you need to have authority to go and contract with those resources. I think the authority to procure is now in place. Now the contracting has to go efficiently, get those resources contracted. And again, they may be more expensive, but if they're available right now, you may need to take and consider those resources that are available, even though they may not be the lowest cost resources offered.
And so for example, and I think we've got a lot of Edison folks here. I know Northerners are subcommittee chair, but Edison and that Southern California area, 11.5 gigawatts, I think, is what the PUC ordered in their procurement. So that's what you're saying is authorized.
The last procurement is 11,500. 11.5 gigawatts of authorized procurement, 9.5 gigawatts till 2025, and then the last 2 gigawatts are between 2026 and I think 2028. So there is sufficient. There's authorized procurement. Those need to be contracted, but there is risk in that 11,500. Now we're seeing actual risk of supply chain issues causing delays to potential development of that 11.5 gigawatts.
Okay, and so what do you project when you do your planning? How much do you think that actually comes online by 25? How much of that 9.5 do you think we actually get? And according to your model, I don't mean you, but what is the ISO planning out of that?
This is a question that's still kind of out there. I talked about the 1,800 megawatt gap. That assumes that procurement comes in on time. To the extent there is a 30, 40, or 50% delay rate, and that will increase that potential gap from 1,800 to whatever that delay is. So it could be additional thousands of megawatts of gap if there is significant delays in that procurement and development.
Understood. Well, stakes are high. We appreciate your diligence on this. Thanks for letting me drill down here for a second.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
The goal, as Senator Stern said, is to get into the details in the subcommittee. Do my other colleagues any questions?
I had a couple quick questions. Thank you for your testimony, and I apologize for stopping in late. I think earlier this month we had a presentation from PUC and the administration, and I think they presented to us that when using a 1 in 10 year event model that we're looking at a gap in 2025 of about 2,000 megawatts, and I guess I just wanted to get a little more specific on that. What is the likelihood of that if we're looking at a 1 in 10 year event? Is that something that we're likely to face as 2,000 megawatts? Is it something that is less than likely? I'm just trying to get a sense of like what you see as the probability of us facing that type of shortfall.
So as I just mentioned, Senator Stern's question, that 1,800 megawatt or 2,000 megawatts gap is the gap at this point that would be expected if there was kind of a perfect procurement outcome. In other words, all the procurement authorized was developed on time. And you'd say, well, why is that? And the things that changed over this time since that procurement has occurred is there's been additional load growth forecasted. So in that time period, so the load has increased. The load forecast for that time period has increased. So that's why that there's that additional gap that's predicted. So the answer to your question is that gap, unless we do other things at this point, is a high probability gap. Now I want to be clear. A gap in 1 in 10 does not mean that we will have certainty around load shed events. What it says is that the probability of load shed events is a higher probability than what you would typically want to plan for. It doesn't mean that those load shed events are inevitable, but that gap, a larger gap from the 1 in 10 criteria, indicates that you have a higher probability than you would want to under those conditions.
Yeah, and maybe just to specify, understanding that we are projecting out that we will have aggressive growth in procurement and new projects coming online. Let's bake that in. What I'm really trying to understand is the 1 in 10. What's the likelihood that we have a 1 in 10 year event, just from like a percentage perspective?
It's exactly that. That is the probability.
Oh, 10%.
So it's a 10% probability that you would have a event like that, and that is trying to say that because you have that 10% chance, you'd want to minimize that potential of load shed during that 10% event.
And then I think this gets to a little bit of what Senator Stern was asking, but both in the near term and long term, I mean, I guess when I think about this problem, and I have not studied it in the depth that you all have, but you'd want to build in redundancy, right? And so, you know, where do we see the bottlenecks right now as far as bringing new projects online and new storage? Is it in the capital? Is it in the regulatory approvals? Is it just in the planning and implementation? And is there anything we in the legislature can do to help speed that up? As far as renewables.
Well, okay, so renewables and storage, again, in combination, you need to have a combination of now probably solar development and storage to meet that later net peak period. As I said previously, I think the challenges are a three-pronged challenge. Can you find the supply chain, those who have the capability of developing the raw materials into the batteries or the panels? Can you find that supply chain? That's been challenged of late. Two, can you find where to locate those so that you can minimize need for new transmission in the near term, or develop new transmission to support the longer term development of what's going to be needed in excess of 40 to 60 gigawatts of additional development? Where do you put that, and do you have enough lead time to develop the transmission to support that new development, including overcoming and streamlining the permitting requirements for new transmission? And then third is really bringing all that together. Do you have the project in the right location with the supply chain, and can you get that project contracted with a load serving entity off-taker so that financially that project can move forward? You need those three things to come together: interconnection, location, supply chain, and then obviously the off-taker contracting with that resource. That's the mix of things that have to come together all in a timely manner to keep these things moving along.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And fortunately, we do have some bills in the legislature this year on some of those pieces, particularly around transmission, and appreciate the info we've gotten from your office on those as well. Just to wrap up, any thing that you've not mentioned that from your perspective, CAISO needs from the legislatures to prevent or reduce these risks in the long run?
I'll just say that diversity in terms of development is important, but diversity, regional and geographical diversity, as well as technological diversity, is going to be important. And this is going to mean that we want to make sure that we have the ability to leverage the regional capability of the system. So even though I said that there may be tightness of conditions across the region, other parts of the region are developing new resources as well. And the ability to bring in, let's say, wind from other parts of the region when wind production is high, but wind production or solar production is low in California, becomes a real advantage if you can leverage that regional diversity in the system. So appreciate the efforts to continue to look at regional opportunities. We'll just say that the energy imbalance market, the Western energy imbalance market, has produced significant benefits, over $2 billion worth of benefits for the region, including about 40-50% of that to California. And this continuing the ability to both develop resources where you can and get them developed, but also leverage the regional capability of the system is going to be key to the success.
Well, thank you very much. Certainly, we have much building to do here in California, and so it's good to hear that perspective as well about that technological and regional diversity. Thank you very much. Thanks for that valuable context on the conditions of this summer's reliability. That's really one of the main things we wanted to get, is understand the roots of it and start to get to solutions. So now we're going to turn to two advocates who've long been considering why transitioning the grid in a reliable, clean, and equitable manner is important. First, we'll hear from Michael Colvin, who leads the California Energy Program for the Environmental Defense Fund. Second, we'll hear from Alexis Sutterman, who's the program manager of the Energy Equity Program at the California Environmental Justice Alliance. First, welcome, Mr. Colvin.
Good morning, Senator. Wanted to confirm that you can hear me okay.
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Fantastic. Give me one moment to share my screen. And hopefully you're seeing this. Well, thank you all so much for having me today. As the Senator mentioned, my name is Michael Colvin. I'm an Environmental Defense Fund, and I was asked today as this part of the hearing to talk about both the causes and some of the consequences of overly relying on fossil for reliability. And so I will be talking about that, and then also talking briefly about some of the near-term solutions. As Mr. Rothleader just indicated, reliability really is a concern of we don't have enough power available. But this is something that can almost always be solved with proper planning and forecasting. The problem that the state finds itself in right now is that because of both climate change, some extreme weather events, the pandemic, and some of the other items that the Senator identified during his opening comments, what would have been a normal plan in sort of normal circumstances and the investment choices that we made are not panning out exactly as we thought. We're not living in normal times. And I think the most important thing from a high-level perspective is to think about it's not just about the total amount of power that the state has available. We have enough. It's just that we don't have enough being made at the times of day we need them, and we're not getting the power where we need them. So the constraints are both the generation resource profiles are not matching the demand, and we just don't have enough physical wire to move that power to where we need it to be when we need it to be there. And so as we're thinking through, well, is fossil a good solution for us or not? We have to be thinking about, is this the right time of day? And is this going to be actually be able to get the power where we need it because of the transmission capacity available? I stole this cartoon a little bit, but we've all heard about the duck curve. I stole this from a news article from a couple of years ago, but I note this because the duck curve is getting to be a little bit more extreme, and it's shifting a little bit more itself. Now, we've been talking about the duck curve for many years, over a decade. The dips on the net load are getting to be more extreme, but they are shifting as well. And part of this is due to climate change that Mr. Rothleader just spoke about this a little bit, but I want to emphasize this a little bit more specifically. The California load, it is shifting. We used to have sort of our peak around 4 to 5 in the afternoon, that shoulder, and that's shifting backwards. We are now seeing a delay shift back by a couple of hours, and so we're not having that match of the sun kind of going down and some of the wind and some of the other stuff are not coming up quite at the right time. And so we're getting short because of the fact that our shift and our peak is happening by a couple of hours. And we're seeing this to happen a little bit more and more. And that is in part due to the extreme weather events. There is also something happening here because of COVID, that we're not all in office buildings as much, using our air conditioning, kind of our central cooling as much. We're all home a lot more. And it just is a different load profile than what kind of was a normal thing that was driving the peaks. And so we have to sort of be aware of the fact that part of this was just not a predictable, plannable thing. So I did want to spend a moment talking about, well, why are we relying on fossil? Well, a combined cycle gas turbine, or a CCGT, does have an attribute of it can run when we need it to run for as however long we can run. However, that's not always the case. We need the gas that powers that CCGT, a combined cycle gas turbine, needs gas. We need the gas to be able to get there, and that's getting harder with the amount of solar and the amount of other attributes that we're bringing online. Our gas-fired power plants, their load profiles themselves are a little bit more unpredictable. And the gas system itself was never designed to move this much gas around this quickly and this much unpredictability. It takes 9 hours to move gas from the California border to downtown Los Angeles. And if we don't exactly know when we're going to need that gas to move that quickly, if we don't have kind of good forecasting on the day ahead side of things, even if we were saying we need that fossil resource to be there, we could be ending up in a situation where if we're not charging the gas generators correctly, we're not going to actually have the gas available when we need it. And so better forecasting is going to be required there. In addition, and Senator Stern was starting to ask this in some of his opening questions, we do have load pockets in the state, especially down in Southern California. And we just might not have enough capacity in the wire itself to move that electricity from the generators to where we need it in some of those load pockets. So when we talk about, well, is the only way to be relying on, to create reliability, is the only way to rely on that is fossil generation? The answer is not necessarily, because we both have a gas problem and a wire problem that do need to get solved. Now, we're able to do it right now, but it's not a great long-term solution. I'm an environmental advocate, so of course I'm going to talk about the long-term climate implications of overly relying on fossil, but there are near-term implications as well, both local air quality concerns and you see on this map here on the left-hand side are once through cooled power plants. There's overall land use and coastal implications from some of these power plants as well, especially in the LA basin. These are frontline communities, and we really need to recognize that there's a disproportionate impact on disadvantaged communities from over-relying on some of these plants. Not only that, but when you have a power plant that is not running all that much, the energy costs for them to be able to pay all the workers and to pay for all the gas that they need to do and do everything else, you're spreading those costs out over fewer hours, which means that the power itself is more expensive. That we are seeing an uptick in pricing in both the capacity payment and in the energy payments. And so some of these fossil resources are looking pretty expensive. And as Senator Min was sort of just asking a few moments ago, there are direct affordability implications that need to be thought through here before we start relying on this too much. I did want to, and I know this is more of the topic of the next panel, but I did want to take a moment to highlight there are some non-fossil strategies that are available for this state, that things that we can be doing in the next couple of years, and then also in the longer term as well. In no particular order, I did want to highlight there are customer-owned investments that can be distributed energy resources. You don't need to be relying on wires if you have something that is happening and generating right on site. And there are things that can be done to incent clean investments, but we have to compensate customers for that accordingly. I recognize that there is a bill in front of the legislature right now that is thinking about how do we do more incentives for these clean distributed energy resources that provide additional resiliency, and that is Assemblymember Friedman's bill, AB 2667. There are other choices that are available out there in terms of incentives to help customers get that out there. I note that customers themselves could export some of their extra power back onto the grid in addition to just removing the demands from the grid itself, but we're not compensating customers appropriately for that. There is some more work to be done there. This next bullet point here, and I apologize for some of the acronyms, but as Mr. Rothleader indicated, we do need to be thinking more about how we can rely on our Western market, going from just a near-term 15-minute or hour-ahead day trade to a better day-ahead trade, and that's going from the energy imbalance market to the day-ahead market. And we are seeing that, wait a second, money is there to be made, and there is a lot more forecasting. If we start getting the rule changes there right, we are going to be able to start seeing a lot of relief, both on being able to displace power and also to reduce some of the curtailment that we're seeing. I'm certain Mr. Morris is going to talk more about this next bullet point, so I don't want to steal his thunder too much, but we are seeing pretty much exponential growth in short duration storage assets in the state, and they're able to come online very quickly. And so we should continue to push on that when it's available, recognizing that there are some supply chain challenges. And last but not least, in the near term, we are seeing more reliance on flex alerts and on other things to basically ask customers to save some power. It's great that we ask customers to do that out of the goodness of their heart, but the more that we can send a price signal to customers to save and to conserve, the better. And I'm certain Mr. DeVries is going to talk about the need to how we can aggregate and compensate customers correctly for those types of actions. And last but not least, I did want to be thinking about, as we're focusing on some of these short-term solutions, recognize that long-term, the planning should be to say we don't need fossil for our long-term strategies. That is going to mean a bigger reliance on a Western-wide grid for trading purposes, for getting power in and out. That is going to need more in-state transmission as well. In addition to the short duration storage, we're going to need some longer term storage, and that can mean both multi-day and or 8 hour plus. We're going to need a variety of a portfolio there. And that's because we are going to encounter sometimes in this state, especially in the winter and spring periods, where we'll have multiple dark, cloudy days, and we're going to deplete our short duration batteries, and we're going to need something else to help firm and shape our resources out. I've briefed this committee before already on the need for clean, firm power. I don't want to repeat that too much, but I will recognize that California does have the ability to contain overall system costs and fully decarbonize its electric system if we make appropriate investments into clean, firm power resources. And Senator Becker has been a real leader on this topic, and I encourage us to be making some progress on this now so that way it's available for us in the long term. And with that, thank you so much for your time and attention, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Colvin. We're now going to move on to Alexis Sutterman. You mentioned there's a program manager of the Energy Equity Program at the California Environmental Justice Alliance. Welcome, Ms. Sutterman.
Thank you so much for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. Let me just share my screen. One moment. All right, thank you so much, Senator Becker and the subcommittee, for having this really important hearing. I think, of course, this is a really timely time for this discussion as we are in the midst of yet another very hot summer in California. My name is Alexis. I'm the Energy Equity Manager at the California Environmental Justice Alliance, or CEJA. Our alliance is representing working class communities of color across California that are most impacted by pollution, poverty, and climate change. There was already so much really important and valuable information shared by the previous speakers, so I'm really appreciating the opportunity to dig into the details. And today I'll be speaking about why it's a moral imperative for us to really get this right and transition off of gas in a way that's reliable, not only for the sake of our climate, but of course, as previous speakers mentioned, for the sake of our frontline communities who have been bearing the brunt of fossil fuel infrastructure for decades, centuries now, given the fact that we've had these legacies of historical environmental racism, redlining, siting issues, and a long list of things that I'm sure all of us are very familiar with. And so, today I just wanted to start off by kind of emphasizing the point that many folks have already shared. Gas in California is really a huge equity issue. We have about half of our gas-fired power plants that are located in environmental justice communities who are already the ones who have the highest energy burden, least resources to protect themselves from climate threats, and have really been bearing the brunt of pollution in California. And so for this reason, we really want to make sure that we are prioritizing, when we're thinking about retiring gas, we're really prioritizing clean energy investments first and foremost in these communities so that we can retire gas plants in these communities, ensure that there is local reliability that is met and pollution that is decreased. Let me go to the next slide. So, I think we all know that gas plants are heavily polluting. They emit methane, nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, and these pollutants are just worsening our climate crisis, and it's leading to really serious health impacts in our communities. So many of our members have turned out to events sharing personal stories of their family members having asthma. Almost, everyone near their area having at least some sort of impact because these plants have been sited right in their neighborhoods. And not only are these chemicals extremely dangerous to our public health, but there's also been a lot of other dangers that we've seen from our gas plants. There's been about 35 explosions and 32 ignitions at transmission pipelines reported by gas companies from 2010 to 2016. I think we all can remember the 2015 Aliso Canyon gas storage facility blowout that released 109,000 metric tons of methane into the atmosphere over 4 months. And methane is also, extremely dangerous because it's 30 times stronger than carbon at trapping heat over a 100-year period. So not only is, the clear notion of pollution that's coming from gas, but there's also all these other threats that really impact, especially those communities at the front lines. In addition, and I wanted to mention that just this past Sunday night, the Alamitos Energy Center, which is California's second large gas-fired power plant, was also blowing thick smoke into the air of Long Beach for over an hour. So these are things that are very live. They're continuing to hurt people and residents nearby and just continue to scare them because there's just a lot of fear and uncertainty about the gas system overall, given its given so much of its dangers that it has already caused to our communities. We've partnered with so many great experts. There's a lot of great studies. These quotes are from Union of Concerned Scientists, just showing that, the use of natural gas comes with all these climate, health, economic, and environmental risks, which I'm confident that we're all trying to get away from. And so in addition to that, I did also want to point out, and apologies, I went a little too fast, but I did also want to point out that in addition to the gas plants, we are really concerned about the state's over-reliance on diesel backup generators. We really should be doing everything possible to get off of these diesel backup generators because they're toxic and carcinogenic and are disproportionately also impacting disadvantaged communities. The California Air Resource Board estimated that diesel bugs during public service power shutoffs in October 2019 alone produced the diesel PM equivalent to almost 29,000 heavy-duty diesel trucks driving on California roadways for 1 month. But in contrast to diesel trucks, diesel backup generators are stationary, so they're concentrating all of these air emissions in close proximity to where people live and breathe. So again, this is just re-emphasizing the point that we know climate change is here. We know this extreme heat is going to continue to escalate, and we need to find other solutions so that we're not just perpetuating more and more pollution and harm. And then let me go to the next piece. As Mr. Colvin touched on earlier and Mr. Rothleader as well, there are many solutions that we could, of course, be really pursuing, acknowledging the complexities of the transmission and the siting and the interconnection, really hoping we can take that seriously and find a solution forward, because there are a lot of really modern technologies that are available today and only getting cheaper and only getting more available, as I'm sure other speakers will be able to touch on in greater detail. I'd say how some of the ones we've been really, really excited about and really looking towards have been clean distributed energy resources, especially really excited about the notion of and the potential of community solar and storage in California, which in our perspective has been largely overlooked and it is a huge opportunity to not only increase our grid grid reliability and increase energy supply, but also bring much needed bill credits and much needed bill credits and relief for customers that subscribe to these programs. Many of them could be low income communities and renters who otherwise don't have a lot of options for installing solar on their roofs or getting any sort of access to distributed energy, as others may have more capabilities of doing so. We're also really interested in demand response, as others have been talking about. We really think that that the emergency load reduction program by the PUC has huge potential, but we are disappointed that the PUC although this program has been approved, even recent utility literature related to the Flex Alerts fails to mention it. So we think this program has huge potential, but there still hasn't been enough efforts to really promote it and to ensure that customers are getting paid to reduce their load, especially those at the front lines who don't have a lot of resources. This is a great opportunity to have an equitable solution and again, and meet those grid reliability needs. In addition to that, we've been supportive of clean community microgrids, energy efficiency, and the last bullet point on here is just ensuring that when we think about where to prioritize clean energy investments from CEJA's perspective, of course, we would really support making sure it's targeted in the areas that we want to that are the most overburdened. So thinking about, for example, Cal and virus green communities, disadvantaged communities, and those that are the most climate vulnerable, so that we can be retiring gas first in those places and really having this transition to clean energy include those at the front lines and prioritize them. And with that, I will end with basically just reemphasizing the point that climate change, of course, is a huge threat, but it's also an opportunity to rethink our own social systems and how we're collectively living together and who's getting to now be prioritized in decision making. So for us, it's something that is daunting, but it's also in a way, an organizing opportunity to push for a stronger and more cohesive society. And if we can retire gas, that would be a huge win for equity in California. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you. First, turn over to my colleagues. Senator Stern, any questions or?
Sure. I guess my question to both of you is maybe taking a regional perspective on things, specifically in Southern California, where the future of a number of idling or soon to potentially be rebuilt gas plants are on the docket, whether at the POU level. I know there's talk of building a new gas generation facility in I think it's either Glendale or the Burbank area. Keeping Ormond and some of the OTC in Huntington and Redondo online, and to Ms. Sutterman's point, pumping up Aliso and our gas storage system beyond even what's safe considering the seismicity, but really, in light of the 9-hour border trip that gas has to take to get to downtown LA from Mexico, where the means by which it's extracted or received through either an LNG terminal from as far as Russia, because there is Russian gas in our system, and we should make no mistake about it. Just because it came over a pipeline from Mexico does not make it anything different. But from reducing our reliance on that kind of gas import to imports from the east, primarily from fracking, either from Texas or as far as as far east as Pennsylvania's fracking fields. If we're actually going to consume energy that we're proud of, can we move fast enough from a permitting perspective, from a public participation perspective, to hit the gaps that Mr. Rothleader talked about, the 2025 period, and how are your organizations sort of thinking about, especially from the justice community's perspective, we striking that balance between speed and process, because there's going to be a need for speed and siting and moving processes quickly. And right now, the PUC in some ways is the bottleneck, just from moving from authority to procure to contracting for that procurement. But from a stakeholder perspective and from a community perspective, have you thought about what going faster looks like?
Unless both of you want to take a quick shot at that. Thanks.
Yeah, happy to, and I'm happy to jump in. I think on this one, this is something that, again, is also a very live discussion. I know that there have been many talks in a lot of different spaces in the Energy Trailer Bill around transmission, streamlining our new certification process. I think this is something that, in terms of our alliance, we're still in deep discussions on, so we don't have a strong position on any certain piece of it at this point. But in a general sense, we do agree that there needs to be that balance between speed and ensuring there is sufficient environmental review. And I think there is definitely a path forward there. What I've been hearing from many stakeholders and folks is that there are a lot of redundancies in certain processes, and that if we can have a way for environmental justice communities in particular and environmental justice advocates to be the ones really leading that discussion and having the opportunity to be at the table for understanding the redundancies that could maybe be shifted or changed while still ensuring there is sufficient environmental review, and that we are being very considerate and thoughtful. I think that would really be the balance we want to strike. We definitely don't want to delay for the sake of delay. And if there's another mechanism that works better, for example, having a state agency like CEC or look over something as kind of the main point to be certifying different components of transmission and other pieces, then we would like to consider that. Again, I think for us, it's just making sure that there isn't something in which there completely bypasses CEQA or takes away full, a chance to have a full environmental review. But I think there is definitely a path forward.
If I may, I think there are two really quick responses to that question, Senator. The first one is there's three, beyond the contracting, beyond the PUC, as you sort of acknowledged, and I think the PUC has actually done a pretty admirable job of trying to send out the market signals to say, start procuring, here's the timeline, here's what's needed. I think there are three constraints that we have to hit. The first one is transmission, which I spoke about. The second one is the amount of land that is going to be available for power generation. And do we have that land available in each county? And each county is going to want to say, here's what we want. We are seeing more local concerns and constraints that are available. And then the third is the permitting process itself. And I think all three are going to have to work in concert to make certain that we are building and procuring the right resources given transmission, permitting, and land use constraints. And so as we are thinking through, well, what choices should we be making? That would be sort of the guidance I would give to this committee, is to make certain that we are thinking through and putting somebody, in charge to say, all right, now are we balancing our portfolio correctly given this new information that we weren't really ever having to think about before? So
this TED team then that Mr. Rothleader mentioned and that President Reynolds mentioned, do you think that's the right place to be doing that? Is there a way to run that process? Did we learn anything, say, from ERA or other past efforts that we should be nudging towards? Because it's a somewhat of an informal process that you're talking about, right? That sure. It's a leadership. It's the governor, right? It's essentially the governor building a team that can do extraordinary things across jurisdictional lines, and they've done it. But yeah,
So I think. I think that is part of the solution. I don't think it is the entire solution. I don't think we can just wash our hands and say we are done. And the reason why I say that is only going to be handling transmission. It's not going to be looking at land use and permitting. and this process the type process that's out there, it's not something that all stakeholders can engage in. I, at Environmental Defense Fund, am not allowed to be in and on that process. That's fine. I don't. I've got plenty of other work to do, but there is that is part of a larger whole in terms of. Is it the governor's office, themselves? I think they can provide some leadership. I also think they can designate the leadership and say, here's who's in charge in terms of having that wider lens, having that perspective, and report back up and have that accountability.
Well, and it seems like the Energy Commission's starting to play that role, no? I mean, in terms of how what Ms. Sutterman brought up in terms of parallel certifications, and sort of seeing the plan through, having the incentives also to be a stopgap, like sort of non-rate-based funding there. I mean, the legislature at least has endowed them with the budgeting power, and now under 205, it seems like a lot of the sort of centralization around permitting and some of the sort of overlapping land use issues. Is that fair to say?
I think there is more that can be done, and if this subcommittee is looking for a recommendation, I think this is a great place to clearly designate, here are our main concerns, and somebody's going to report back to us on a regular basis on how you're addressing them, and then you can designate that.
Right, or better yet,
right now there is not, the legislative authority doesn't exist, so folks are doing it because they're trying their best, but they need the resources and they need the authority to make that really happen.
Well, and the report back to the legislature, but perhaps also the people of California.
Of course.
I mean, and we are that body, but in the reporting back, to make it dashboard type reporting, to not necessarily overly formalize, white papers back in a year and a half, but to have that ticker up every day, so we're all sort of in that race to fill the gap together, and some way to look at projects in queue, to be able to sort of map these things out and give space to the local government folks to know that they're on a bigger team here too. That it's not just what Riverside County is going through on any given day on a conditional use permit, but that they're part of a very important race that we need to win. So, I think, identifying some of those key metrics for us would, from my perspective, be immensely helpful. And there may be layers of information, right? There's a certain layer that the public is going to want to see, but then we'll want to drill down a little layer deeper, but mostly just to get operational. And especially in light of the fact that now we see Ms. Mata Santos is leaving the administration soon, who's been the de facto coordinator. I think there's a big question out there of who can sort of play that central quarterbacking role in her stead after we finish this legislative session, in the same way that Michael Picker played in the early Brown administration. So I think, the governor has got to go get the best and brightest and keep putting it together. But, we'd gladly take your recommendations there.
Okay, we should probably move on here. This was a final wrap-up. But thank you to the panelists from this section. I apologize, we're running a little bit behind schedule, but I appreciate that. The next portion includes a host of speakers who will all introduce a different approach on how to strengthen reliability. Some bring technology ideas, while others will propose policy fixes. Each of these speakers is meant to add to a toolkit of ideas for future reliability policies that can be implemented. Because of scheduling, I'm going to ask Carl Guardino to go first, who is the Executive Vice President of Bloom Energy. If you're available, Mr. Guardino, why don't you go ahead and with the first testimony.
And with apologies to Cisco DeVries for the change, I do have another appointment that I have to leave for that has been long planned. So thank you, Cisco. I was looking forward to hearing you. Subcommittee Chair Becker and Senator Stern, and this group of distinguished speakers on a topic that is so important to our communities, to California, our country, and our planet. I want to thank you all. In fact, the role of this committee is entirely in alignment with the mission statement of Bloom Energy, to make clean, reliable energy affordable to everyone in the world. And in a state and on a planet rocked by the causes and consequences of climate change, including drought, wildfires, PSPS events, and rolling blackouts, the mission statement of Bloom and the mission of this subcommittee are not only important, they're essential. Again, my name's Carl Guardino. I'm honored to be joining you today. I don't want to be presumptuous that everyone knows about this California-founded and headquartered company called Bloom Energy. So let me briefly provide an overview, and I'm going to skip slides so that I can keep on time for all of you. But humble beginnings, Bloom Energy was created in 2000 after our founder and CEO, Dr. K.R. Schroeder, ended his work as the Dean of Engineering at the University of Arizona while simultaneously working with NASA on the manned Mars mission, when his role in that mission was similar to Matt Damon's role in my favorite movie, The Martian. How do you take the toxic atmosphere of Mars and create oxygen for both life support and propulsion in, around, and eventually back off of Mars? Well, Dr. Schroeder cracked that code, and then they deferred that manned Mars mission. And he did what all great innovators do. He packed up his car, traveled to Silicon Valley, set up shop on the property of NASA Ames in Mountain View, and started a clean energy innovative company. Today, fast forward 22 years later, that company has nearly 2,000 careers in California, 46 PhDs, more than 360 U.S. patents, and by the end of the year, nearly 1,500 advanced manufacturing careers in the United States that don't even require a high school diploma. In fact, we've doubled down in our California commitment, recently opening an advanced manufacturing facility in Fremont the size of 3 football fields, and are actively seeking nearly 400 additional employees. Bloom's core technology is a fuel cell, which has many attributes of importance to this committee.
Mr. Guardino, we're not if you're seeing slides, we're not seeing the slide.
Right. I've decided to skip the slide.
Oh, okay, good. No problem with that.
I'm going to race
Excellent.
right in and be good stewards with your time.
Always better without, but good. I just want to make sure. Thank you.
You're going to have to deal with me as my own slide. With that, our core technology is a fuel cell, which has many attributes of importance to this committee and to California. First, by definition, fuel cells do not combust, which means we virtually eliminate localized air pollution with a 99.8% reduction of NOx and SOx and virtually no particulate matter. The importance of this reality is underscored in the April 2020 Harvard study that grappled with the grim fact that 1 of every 5 deaths on the planet is directly attributed to poor air quality. In the United States, dirty air has the greatest impact in our most underserved neighborhoods, which are overwhelmingly communities of color. And I want to thank Alexis with Seha for underscoring this point. Because of our state's over-reliance on dirty diesel generators, a stranded asset that lasts for decades. Please read the recent study by M-Cubed with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District and the South Coast Air District, and the proliferation of dirty diesel, especially in and around underserved communities, in just the past 3 years. Another core attribute in a state suffering through its worst drought in the past 1,200 years is that, other than in startup phase, Bloom Energy servers don't use water. 1 megawatt of Bloom Energy in California eliminates the equivalent of 2,700 Olympic-sized swimming pools, each containing 660,000 gallons of water each and every year. And with more than 240 megawatts deployed in California alone, in a country in which 1 of every 10 gallons of fresh water is used for the production or cooling of energy, we make a material difference in water use. And I want to thank Michael Colvin and his excellent presentation for EDF about land use efficiency and in every county. Bloom's solutions are space efficient. In fact, a megawatt of power doesn't have to travel long distances over a transmission transmission line and lose half of that power, but is set up right next to the facility we're empowering in 5 to 7 parking spaces in the parking lot of that facility. Quickly on our technological advancements that are so important to our collective goals. With our deployment of renewable biogas for water treatment plants, landfills, and agricultural facilities, green hydrogen, as we have actively deployed for more than a year in South Korea, carbon capture for difficult to decarbonize industries like cement and steel, and marine transport for cruise lines and cargo ships to improve air quality and reduce greenhouse gas emissions at sea, as well as in and around our ports. Of significant importance in a state that is home to 40% of all goods brought into the United States, and its environmental justice impacts in our port communities and the trucking routes leading into and out of those ports. Clean, reliable energy is the mission of this committee. It's the mission and passion of Bloom Energy. Our modular design, our history of standing up when our increasingly overtaxed and unreliable grid goes down, and our paths to decarbonization form a firm foundation to serve our state's 40 million residents in the 5th largest economy in the world, and our ability to uniquely serve critical facilities like hospitals, grocery stores, data centers, jails, and retail outlets, services on which we all depend every day, but especially during a climate crisis. I look forward to hearing the other panelists and sharing further in the Q&A portion. And thank you, Senator Becker, Senator Stern, for pulling us together today.
Good. Thank you for joining. Thank you also for highlighting the role of these diesel generators and the impact that they're having on air quality in our communities. And again, as we mentioned this section as a toolkit, a lot of that, part of that is how do we replace these diesel generators that, as you say, will be stranded assets. Next up, we will...
And I'm going to step away, but I ran track in school, and I ran on the relay team. So I'm going to hand the baton to my colleague, Brady Van Engelen, in case there are questions in the Q&A.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Next, we'll hear from Cisco DeVries, who is CEO of OhmConnect, a demand response aggregator. Welcome, Mr. DeVries.
Good morning. Thank you, Senator, for both calling the meeting and for both you, Senator Stern, and the rest of the committee for your leadership on this. Power corrupts, PowerPoint corrupts absolutely, so I plan to be absolutely corrupted here with it and bring up my screen. Hopefully you're seeing it now.
Yeah, we can see it.
Great. My name is Cisco DeVries. I am the CEO of OhmConnect, and it's a real pleasure to be here. The company itself is 8 years old. We are based in California, actually in Oakland, California, and we are very proud of the fact that we have pioneered a new, very consumer-centric approach to demand response and residential demand flexibility that can both help customers save money on their electricity bill, earn some money from energy markets and lowering their energy use, as well as help support the grid through this transition to clean energy. We have about 200,000 customers in California. That makes us the largest residential demand response program in the state. And in those customers' homes, we have direct control of over 250,000 appliances and devices. So this is everything from EV chargers to hot water heaters to, of course, lots of smart plugs, thermostats, and alike. When the grid is needs help, when there are either flex alerts or to avoid flex alerts, or when the price of electricity becomes very high in the wholesale markets, OhmConnect is dispatched just like any power plant would be dispatched. But instead of supplying power, burning fossil fuels to generate power, we reduce the demand for electricity. And we do so very quickly. And we do so using both our customers and their devices in concert Now we can now provide in both under contract to load serving entities in the state, hundreds of megawatts. And we also bid now 10,000 times a day to the California Independent System Operator, letting them know exactly how many megawatts we have, where and at what price we need to get paid to be dispatched. And we are dispatched hundreds of times per year. Every time we are dispatched, we help reduce the energy use in homes, and then we pay our customers for the reductions that they have produced. Overall, we've now reduced over 17 million. We've paid our customers over $17 million in mostly in cash rewards and other prizes. Wanted to note, especially given the importance here as we deal with the issues of equity and environmental justice, that about 40% of our customers are in low to moderate income communities, and over 50,000 live in multifamily buildings, making OhmConnect one of the few ways that many customers can participate directly in the benefits of the clean energy transition today, and certainly then supporting them financially as well. I wanted to start by making just one example of OhmConnect in action, and to give an example of what demand response, and particularly what residential customers, when properly provided with incentives and devices and controls and information, can do to support our grid. In front of you, you can see September 6th, 2020. This was about 3 weeks after the state experienced rolling blackouts because of a supply shortage of about 1 gigawatt. On September 6th, things were looking pretty bad, and the PUC, CAISO, and the CEC reached out to OhmConnect to see what else, everything we could do to help, along with many other entities across the state, prevent blackouts from recurring on that day. I wanted to show you then briefly here on the right side of the screen what OhmConnect does and how different and more important it is in some ways than a Flex Alert can do. What you're seeing here is our users across the state of California, their average energy use in their home starting at midnight on September 6th and going until the end of the day, midnight, as we got to September 7th. You can see that the state declared a Flex Alert at 3 p.m. and our customers began to conserve power, as did many customers across the state of California. However, at 4:50 p.m., we began our dispatch of those customers. And what you can see here is about 100,000 California residents reducing about 30% of their electricity use and maintaining it for 2 straight hours, near perfectly, until the grid emergency had started to abate and the dispatch ended. We did this in coordination with CAISO and the CEC and communicated directly the importance to our users. Over the course of this few-day period in August and September, we paid our customers over $1 million for their support during these emergencies, and we're very proud of the fact that we are one of the key reasons the state was able to avoid blackouts on that difficult day. So that is how OhmConnect can and has supported the grid during emergencies. And we are, of course, not the only one. There are residential demand response and other programs that have done incredible work. However, demand response is not, and in an emergency is actually just one part of the 3 goals that we have in California. Of course, in an emergency, when a Flex Alert is called, we want to be able to respond and help keep the lights on for Californians. And that's what you saw on September 6th. That is a critical feature in the event that 3 to 5 times a year we have such an emergency. But in some ways, even more important is that we avoid Flex Alerts altogether. And that's our second goal here. How do we prevent emergencies? And in doing so, how do we prevent and keep peaker power plants, the dirtiest, most expensive power plants, often, as you heard, located in low income and other disadvantaged communities, how do we keep those from turning on? How do we keep those turned off? And that's really the core of what OhmConnect has done over the last number of years, is that every day from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., we are in constant coordination with CAISO. And whenever there is an issue, whether it's local or system-wide, we can dispatch within minutes to reduce megawatts of demand, whether that be locally in Fresno or across the state in its entirety. And this is planned and used and useful, and therefore can be dispatched instead of one of these peakers starting up. And in fact, that's exactly how it works. We are dispatched usually in place of a fossil plant. We then, of course, for both of those, pay our customers. But I wanted to point the third one, and this has come up several times in the committee and is very critical, I think, to the future here. We need to shift demand out of peak. We need to deal with the duck curve. And not only do we need to deal with the duck curve because that is how we're going to keep the grid stable as we transition to renewables and through extreme weather, but it is also the number one way we can help customers reduce their energy bills, which are skyrocketing. Our average customer, we have 10% of Fresno County residential customers are members of Connect. On average, they are seeing over $600 increase in their summer electricity bill this year. That's on average in Fresno County across 10%. We can help fix that dramatically by shifting demand out of peak and moving it to less expensive times of the day. And we need to do all of these things together. And unfortunately, the state's approach has been entirely too siloed. It has absolutely been confusing to customers. There is a hodgepodge of different programs depending on which utility and which part of which utility and which program you may have heard from. It is inconsistent. The rules, dollars, and participation change annually, if not more frequently. And it often disadvantages companies like Connect from participation relative to traditional utility programs. Lastly, and importantly, it financially disincentivizes folks like us from helping our customers move their load out of peak. We're very good at it. We continue to do it, but we are actually financially penalized for reducing peak load amongst our customers. So we think it's time for a different approach. And we would like to suggest that between now and summer of 2023, we have a California residential 1 gigawatt challenge. Ultimately, we believe this can be 10 gigawatts of residential load control that can be served the grid day in and day out in emergencies and even to avoid emergencies, as well as to help customers reduce their peak energy use by 15% and reduce their bills by $20 or more per month. In order to do this, what we need from the state legislature and from the state is coordination. We need not this Kafkaesque, confused situation where different programs are run out of different agencies and different parts of agencies and different utilities and different parts of utilities, but one that allows all of these programs, utility, third party, and others to coordinate to have a successful capacity into the grid. The second piece that we need is a consistent long-term approach. So this is what the state has done well with things like the Renewable Portfolio Standard, which really created the utility scale solar business in California and created the incredible success we've had. Or the California Solar Initiative, which jump-started the residential solar industry in the United States and California, or as we're now doing for residential storage. We need to do the same thing for demand response, bring consistent policy, regulatory stability, and coordination across the entire state so that everybody can benefit and so that starting next year, we have an extra gigawatt available to us. And that 1 gigawatt is critical because 1 gigawatt is actually the amount that we were short in August 14th of 2020 when the lights went out. So a gigawatt can make a huge difference. Connect is already up to a couple hundred megawatts of that. We can obviously work together to do a lot more than a gigawatt over time, but this is just a quick snapshot on how much more we can do in a short period of time. I appreciate your time and attention and your leadership on this, and I look forward to any further discussion.
Thank you very much. Senator Stern? Anything?
Do you want to keep going, or do you want to?
Yeah, why don't we keep going? I guess I was going to ask you what immediate actions you think California could be taking to increase their demand response user base. And then you came up with this proposal. I assume that is the thing you would mention. Is there anything else you would mention in terms of, because I've been quite excited about this portion, I know others have as well, because when I look at what we can do in the short term, a demand response is one of those levers. So anything else you think that the state should be doing in the short run?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think last year, the Public Utilities Commission made a $1 billion investment in demand response, the largest anyone's seen, but it was almost entirely focused on utility programs. We were excluded from much of it, for example, and it was coordinated almost entirely focused on emergency response, behavioral response. And we think that's an incredible thing and an investment, and we're supportive of the emergency load reduction program. But as an example, that is just another Band-Aid on top of this big problem that is done in one piece for one part of the state. And what we'd like to see is being able to take the emergency load reduction program, combine it, and look at it in a coordinated way with the new California Energy Commission program that the state approved in the budget cycle, so that we can create something for the state overall that would allow us, any person, any residential customer, anywhere in the state, to be able to participate in at least one program that will help them reduce energy in emergencies, save on their energy bill, and become part of this clean energy solution. It's a really powerful opportunity because the money's already been allocated, it's already available, and the need is so great. We're just not coordinating it well or opening it up to the kinds of engagement that's necessary. So if I were to point to one place where the money's available, we can do it, it is those two programs and how we can start to put those together.
Excellent, thank you. But one quick follow-up.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on that. So what I hear you saying is if you're simply, I mean, right now we sort of arbitrarily bar those who are eligible for an IOU program from participating with third-party demand response, is my understanding. Even if they're not enrolled in one of your programs under either, I think, under the 205 legislation or perhaps under PUC order, is that generally a sense that just merely by being eligible for a utility program, people are being denied this opportunity to have to be part of that, that $1 million 1 hour save the grid moment, or all the other non-emergency moments?
That's right. In fact, the current policy in place from the PUC and through the budget process that just is concluding would do exactly that, which is, it says that if you are in an IOU territory, you are therefore eligible for the emergency load reduction program, and therefore you cannot make use of this new, really interesting, holistic approach that the CEC is starting to put together that involves third parties. So it is absolutely excluding everybody except for those that are in utility programs from participating in this newly created, very important, I think, strategic program. And I think that's obviously one of the key things we have to fix. We need to create an open door for lots of folks to compete, for utilities to provide programs for folks like OhmConnect, but having this sort of wall where we're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars and prohibit other successful programs from participating by law and by regulation is certainly a problem. And I think it's going to dramatically hurt our ability to put money in the pockets of folks, but also to keep the lights on next summer. And we've been pretty certainly active about talking about that.
And so if we met that gigawatt challenge that you're putting out there to the people of California, if we met that, how much money could the people of California potentially see in their pockets?
So number one, that would put just in an annual basis between $10 and $20 million directly in people's pockets. That we would be paid. They would be paid for participation in the grid if they, in normal basis. That's a huge amount of money, but that's dwarfed by how much would be saved by the fact that they're shifting their load out of peak. Their energy bill reductions. The average new OhmConnect customer that connects a device reduces their energy use by 10%. So we're going to try and push that to 15%, but that energy bill reduction over the state is over $100 million. So this is not only a way to keep the lights on, it's a way to put money in the pockets of the people that need it the most. And we're obviously being constrained from doing that today. And I think we certainly shouldn't be the only ones doing it. We just want to make sure everybody can participate in programs like this.
Thanks.
Thank you. Again, appreciate that. As our speaker from CAISO mentioned, demand response is one of the levers, so I appreciate you shedding a light on that. Again, apologies that we are moving behind schedule. Ask presenters to try to keep their remarks somewhat brief. I'm committed to staying here for public comment, and I also do want to include, I know some folks in the room and our friends from labor who we want their perspective as well. As we talk about a clean grid, we want to make sure that good, well-paying jobs are part of that. So would like to get to that as well. So I'll now ask Sam Newell from the Brattle Group to go ahead and present. Thank you. Go ahead. Oop, cannot hear you yet.
Working on it.
Yes, there we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So a little delay with the button there. Good morning. Nice to See you. Thank you for having me here. My name is Sam Newell. I'm a principal from the Brattle Group, and I lead our electricity practice. This analysis we did of the resource adequacy impacts of retaining Diablo Canyon, we did on behalf of Policy Impact, on behalf of Carbon Free California. And our job was to start from the same numbers that CalISO and the CEC and the CPUC are using, and just look at some scenarios where Diablo Canyon could be helpful. And can you see my slides? Oh, I am not yet sharing. Here, let me do that. Okay, here's
Yes,
the first slide.
Yep, we can see now.
Okay. Thanks for your patience. Okay. So we heard from Mr. Rothleader at the beginning about how much capacity would be needed for meeting reliability standards, and that we would need a lot of new resources to meet that, and that there were risks around whether all of those could be deployed in time. And that's what I'll talk about. So over the next 4 years, we would need more than 20 gigawatts of new capacity. That's in nameplate terms, and it's largely solar, storage, some geothermal and pumped storage, some new wind. And that is an enormous amount of capacity to add on top of the base amount of capacity that we have that's shown in gray in this chart. So it's a huge expansion in a few years that would, what we're recognizing is some of the same concerns that Mr. Rothleader said, that there will be siting challenges. We didn't mention that one, but interconnection challenges and supply chain challenges to doing this. This would be adding resources at unprecedented rates in a challenging time. And so what we've done is look at the impact of potential deployment delays on the ability to meet the higher reserve margin. And again, the reason we need so much supply is partly to replace retirements. It's partly because of some load growth. And it's in large part because of recognizing increased risks around the climate extremes, drought, west-wide shortages. And so there's a huge amount of analysis that CalISO and CEC and the CPUC have done around this, and the view is that this is what's needed. Now, let's look forward to 2025 and what would happen if some of that capacity did not materialize. So one of the biggest pieces it depends on is over 10 gigawatts of storage, and now including up to 6 gigawatts per year in 2023. That is more than 3 times as much as has ever been added in the past. The highest rate at which it was added was almost 2 gigawatts in 2021. And even that might be optimistic with tight supply chains. So what would happen if no more than 1.8 gigawatts materialized per year? There would be, by the end, not just the shortfall that Mr. Rothleader mentioned, but even a little more than that, because of this delay in storage, we could have a shortfall of about 4.5 gigawatts. And that could risk shortages with some rolling blackouts and extreme weather with a probability that's worse than that 1 in 10 standard, one event in 10 years. And it could also be worse if we're relying on so much storage, if that is 4-hour storage. If some of the events, shortage events, were longer than that, it could also be worse if the PV deployment were limited and not always there to charge the storage. So what about with retaining Diablo Canyon could reduce that 4.5 gigawatt gap by about a little over 2 gigawatts. So pretty substantial chunk, because it's a big plant. And I'm talking about for meeting the peak in September. As we know, Diablo would retire partly in late 2024 and mid 2025. So that's in 2025. Diablo would help avoid the risk of, this is just one scenario where we don't deploy enough resources. 2026 further depends on being able to deploy geothermal or pumped storage. Those are very complicated, very complicated assets to develop. And this is extremely optimistic because there are a lot of permitting challenges and around the pump storage, and it's a complicated plant that would take many years to build. Same thing with geothermal projects. There aren't even any in the queue or major projects under development, and would take several years to develop. So that, I think, is very optimistic. And again, if you combine that possibility with limiting, if storage weren't built any more than at its maximum historical rate, we could see shortfalls still in 2026 of almost 4 gigawatts. Retaining Diablo could cut that shortfall in half. Or, if it's just one of these scenarios, either storage or these new geothermal pump storage, weren't there, it could close the gap entirely. So I like that this panel is talking about a whole range of solutions, and Diablo is not the only one. We've heard about demand response. We'll hear more about storage, and there's the Strategic Electric Reliability Reserve. Of course, that might partly preserve gas-fired plants, half of which we heard from the centermen are in vulnerable communities and would be emitting. So there are other possible solutions. Diablo, though, has some advantages so we just did this whole study. You may have seen that we released in June that did an extensive analysis of the world with Diablo versus without. And what we found is that it actually displaces a lot of gas-fired generation in the early years, and thereby reduces cumulative CO2 emissions by over 40 million metric tons through 2032. That's comparable to an entire electric sector year of emissions today. And that it would actually save a lot of money because of its low variable cost. So even assuming that it would cost $2 billion to deal with the water intake issues and to get it relicensed, that the net present value of savings over its life would be over $4 billion under some conservative assumptions that we made. So when I look at this, it seems that we're in an environment where we may find ourselves in a place where every megawatt counts. Taking a large existing resource that is non-emitting is, seems like a very attractive thing to look into as a way to address that. And long term, meeting growing energy, especially electrification, growing energy needs, and doing it with lower and lower emissions, relying more and more on wind and solar, it will become actually increasingly important to have a 365/7 resource that can produce for long periods, even when you have periods of low wind and sun that are for longer periods than short-term duration storage can solve. So it sort of has a lot going for it for helping to meet California's reliability, clean energy goals, and to remain reliable. There are actually a lot of scenarios we looked at where that becomes challenging absent a resource like that.
Thank you very much for that perspective and that information. In the interest of time, we're going to move on to our next presenter, Sally McGarren from the University of California, Berkeley. Is Sally with us? Sally, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for having me here. Let me share my screen. Okay, I assume everyone can see that? Okay, well, thank you, Senator Becker and senators of the committee. I really appreciate you having us here today to speak about our project. We're a little different than the previous presenters in that we are using the technology to transform our campus away from natural gas and onto clean energy. I am delighted to share that we received $249 million in the most recent state budget, $83 million per year over the next 3 years. And I want to thank senators who helped advocate for this, some of whom are on this committee. So thank you very much. We are very proud of this statement of support from the state and are looking forward to being partners with the state during this multi-year process. And this funding from the state will allow us to begin construction. We are working with the engineers right now to plan for the initial phase of construction so we can start laying pipe in the ground. Okay, I'm going to start by providing a little bit of background for our project. It's important to realize that UC Berkeley is essentially its own municipality. We manage our own utilities and infrastructure. We currently have a gas-fired cogeneration plant, which supplies the majority of our power. We're also connected to PG&E for the gap in our production of power and for when our cogen plant is disconnected. As I said, we're going to transform our campus. Our plan is to retire our cogeneration plant and replace it with a fully electrified heat pump system, providing heating and cooling to the entire campus using hot water instead of steam. So, sorry, went too fast. Why now? So there's several reasons for why we feel a real sense of urgency about this. A key thing is that we have been working toward this for a very long time. The Berkeley campus takes its carbon neutrality goals very seriously. We have met all of ours to date, and we are determined to meet our 2028 goal as well. Another key reason is our systems are failing. We have an old plant, we have old boiler backup, and we have steam lines that went in when the campus was built in the 1800s. So we are facing a significant investment in our infrastructure to protect the campus, and we want to make sure that we are making a future-facing investment rather than spending money on obsolete technology. Another key reason that we are determined to make this transformation now is resiliency. As has been stated previously by the other presenters, with wildfire and climate change and other pressures, resiliency is critical now. We experienced a loss of power during the PSPSs a few years ago, and it was devastating to our campus, to our students, and in particular to our researchers. We had researchers desperately searching for ways to preserve cell lines and experiments on which they had spent years of their lives, and we want to make sure that this does not happen again. We have a number of critical goals which this project will advance. The primary one is to provide an fully electrified, efficient, reliable system on which the campus's teaching and research can depend for decades. But in addition, we see this as a real opportunity for us to be a leader in this type of transformative conversion. We want to show that a municipality or a university can create a resilient microgrid which serves its constituents well and is a benefit to the larger community and to the state as a whole. This is a huge project. We will be tearing up every inch of our campus, and it will take years to complete. And we need engagement with many partners to make this a success. These partners include the trade workers who will work on the installation of the components of this project. It will include UC Berkeley's existing trade staff who will be trained in new technologies so that they can be part of the green revolution. It will include many industry partners. We expect to work closely with small and medium-sized businesses in California to procure equipment, to advise on implementation, and to aid with the installation. This will be a very valuable engagement opportunity for us with industry representatives on this frontier.
Thank you. We should probably wrap up. I apologize if there's a few other points last points you want to make.
Sure. Just that we're looking at all of the technologies that people have mentioned here. We're looking at solar to feed our grid directly and so that we can feed the grid back again. We're looking at geothermal. We've drilled a well on the campus to test our soil capacity, and we're looking at advanced controls because we know we need to manage our buildings more closely to fit our microgrid model. And lastly, we're delighted with the $249 million. It's a $700 million project. So we are looking at other funding opportunities such as public-private partnerships. We hope that there is some federal funding out there now with the passing of the recent bill, future state funding, and we hope philanthropy for this very exciting project. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you for demonstration about using new technologies. And now we have two more presenters, both very important, but again, we'll ask them to keep their remarks brief. We'll get to some Q&A as well. Brian Biering from the American Clean Power Association. Brian, if you are ready, please go ahead. Brian, we're seeing your screen. I'm not sure I see.
Okay. Can you hear me okay,
Yes,
Senator?
can hear you. Yeah, there you have.
Thank you. My name is Brian Biering. I'm with the law firm Ellison, Schneider, Harris, and Donlin. We are counsel to the American Clean Power Association of California. I also spend a lot of my time working for various independent generators, trying to resolve various development hurdles and issues that delay capacity from coming online. American Clean Power represents the interests of utility-scale, regional and offshore wind, solar, and storage, and merchant transmission developers. We advocate for clear and predictable market rules in California. What I want to start out with is basically a recommendation that we obviously, as a Clean Power Association, support the integration of clean energy on the grid. We also strongly support reliability and believe that if the state cannot maintain reliability, it cannot hope to achieve the clean energy goals. There will not be public acceptance of the clean energy goals. To develop at the pace and scale of generation that's needed to meet the clean energy goals, we really need proactive, predictable procurement signals. There's been some discussion today of the procurement signals today. We have a 3,300 megawatt order that we are working towards. There's also an 11,500 megawatt procurement order that we are working towards. And while we strongly supported those orders, we did not see them coming. And it's one of the reasons why we are seeing delays in capacity. It's one of the reasons why the transmission interconnection queues are backed up. And I think one of the main points I really want to leave you with today is that to address these delays, to really get away from last-minute procurement, we really need longer-term proactive procurement signals. So going farther out than 5 years, looking out 10 years, and aligning that with longer-term transmission signals too. There is a serious delay in how the procurement data flows from the CPUC into the CAISO's transmission planning process. And we are hoping to rectify that by getting better information out about transmission. We've been working on a number of bills this year that would do that. But we also need longer-term transmission planning and transmission planning that may encourage the development of new transmission that's not just for the projects that are already under contract, but the resource areas that we know will be needed in the future. I'm sure many of you have seen this slide before. This was from the SB 100 study. This really just shows the amount of new capacity, new utility scale capacity that's needed in California, and it's huge. And to really achieve these objectives, we need to get working now. We have been working towards these objectives, but the pace and scale has never been seen before in California. We're going to need to build out capacity in a way that we haven't before. We're going to need to encourage financing in a way that we haven't before. And to get that, again, we need clear and predictable rules coming from the Resource Adequacy Program and the IRP program. One of the biggest delays that I've been working through and that our organization has been advocating on is the issue of transmission. Transmission is important on a number of different levels. Obviously, it provides the interconnection of a resource to the grid, but it also provides what's called deliverability. Transmission deliverability is basically the ability of the transmission system to basically deliver electrons from a power plant to load. So even if you can get the project interconnected to the grid, that doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be able to deliver that energy to load. The issue that we've really seen is that there's been delays in both executing on transmission, and it's for a variety of different reasons. But what we really need to see is more proactive transmission planning, looking out farther than 10 years. We really need to be looking out 20 years. And the CAISO has started working towards a 20-year transmission plan. We haven't seen that yet actually flow into the transmission planning process, but would like to see that in the future. The other issue that we're really seeing is that there's a significant delay between the IRP and the transmission planning process. And I kind of outlined an example in the third bullet there. Basically, the way this works is when load-serving entities submit their portfolio data and how they're going to build out their procurement plans, the PUC takes that, combines them, and then translates that to the CAISO in the form of inputs and assumptions for the next TPP cycle. that often takes about 3 years from the time when we actually get the LSEs planned and to when the CAISO is actually starting to plan for transmission. And we need to figure out how to shorten that time frame and, again, plan for a longer-term horizon. I know we're short on time, so the last point I'm going to leave you with is the importance of regional coordination. Mr. Rothleader touched on this earlier today, and California has limited potential in terms of what can actually be developed within its borders, but beyond its borders, both offshore and in other states such as New Mexico, Wyoming, Idaho, there's significant resource development potential. Many other states are already moving forward with combining their reliability objectives with their clean energy goals. California needs to be a part of that solution. California needs to figure out how to tap into these resources that are out of state and place it in high capacity factor areas like New Mexico. You can see on the, just to the left of the word United States there, basically how strong the wind resources are in that region. You can see it also off the coast of California. But to tap into these resources, we really need proactive procurement signals. So what we'd like to see is longer-term procurement that flows directly from the actual planning that isn't developed on an ad hoc basis, but flows directly from the planning into the transmission planning process and provides clear, predictable signals to load-serving entities. With that, I will cede the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that testimony. I will now move on to our final presenter, Alex Morris, Executive Director of California Storage Alliance. I say last presenter, but certainly not the least important topic, as storage has been a theme throughout this hearing. So thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, Senator. Thank you. Alex Morris, the Executive Director with the California Energy Storage Alliance. And I just wanted to say thank you. I think this is important and fantastic for you guys to be gathering information and coordinating this hearing. To Senator Stern and the other senators, hello. I appreciate the chance to be here. And I'll just jump straight into it because in the grand scheme of things, what California is experiencing is what everybody else is going to experience, which is that as you clean up your electric system, you start to add low-hanging fruit like renewables, and you do your best, but sooner or later you stumble into significant challenges where your processes are often overwhelmed. And we're bringing the industries forward into the state to start to provide solutions. And we're basically holding up the old system and the new system at the same time. And this is where all the challenges come together. And I think, like so many of us, we're seeing that change is coming faster than many of our models predicted. And so everybody's ramping up. I think for energy storage, we know that as you push past a 30% renewable standard, you tend to start to need to bring in the storage in order to accommodate ever higher levels of renewables. And so you really need to bring in the right portfolio of storage to make that happen. Now, California, as you may know, is a true leader here and is one of the largest storage markets in the entire world. And on behalf of the Standalone Storage Association, it's a pleasure to work here. We think California is doing a great job. And I think legislatively, near term, we're right to focus on both critical execution areas for the next 2 years, and then also keep an eye on the future and continue to build our solution pipeline and toolkit to make sure California has what it needs in time. We've gotten a lot of great ideas from the group today. I would say perhaps most immediately on behalf of CISA and our 100+ members, focusing on some of the budgetary items in the next month will be critical for near-term help. And I'll give you 2 examples. One is the legislature authorized a budget that included $140 million for long-duration storage commercialization. And there's an additional $240 million available. And I would say all of that funding is critically needed to go through to the CEC for a program, and I'll explain why. And also, I think the legislature is in a position to authorize funding to help with reforms for net energy metering and how that relates to the self-generation incentive program and additions of storage to customer premise. I refer to that as SGIP, and I think the SGIP reauthorizations and extensions or re-uppance is really critical to helping take advantage of all the smart solar systems we already have around the state by augmenting those with storage and then adding more storage. And going all the way back to Mark and Mr. Rothleader's comments, we know that the real near pain point for the state in 23 and 24 and probably 25 is really 5 to 9 p.m. And all of the data we're getting on storage is that we can help with that every day while absorbing renewables. And I think beyond that, though, we want to be building a portfolio that works. And that means we need this long duration storage and kind of an all of the above strategy. So I want to, tip my hat to you guys. I think it's really important what you're doing. On behalf of the industry side, we are committed to California. This is one of our most important markets. And I look forward to answering any questions you have. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much for that important testimony, and look forward to engaging possibly today, but certainly in the future, on how do we continue to increase our storage capacity. Again, in the interest of time, we'll probably move to public comment, and we will start out with public comment here in the room. First of all, again, I just want to thank all of our presenters here today. We're going to move to public comment initially with witnesses here in room 1200. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Mike Robeson here on behalf of the California Municipal Utilities Association. This is the trade association representing the publicly owned utilities, providing about 25% of the state's energy needs. CMUA, I think both senators know, issued a report earlier this year titled Powering California's Future with Clean, Affordable, and Reliable Energy, and had 4 principles that they highlighted in that report. And much of it was kind of repeated by some stated earlier by some of your previous panelists, but basically, CMUA going forward for clean and affordable and reliable energy, their key principle is regulatory predictability, which I do know some of the panelists have commented on, and that's really critical for planning and for procurement purposes, to just know what the rules are going to be, not just today, but down the road and into the future. And also flexibility. Their paper talked a lot about flexibility and the ability to try new technologies and see what the needs are and how they can be met, and giving them that ability. And so really appreciate the hearing today, and appreciate the ability to speak on the public comment, and look forward to working with both senators and other members of the committee on this subject in the next legislative session. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. I do have a number of municipal utilities in my district, so I appreciate those comments. Now we'll hear from Mr. Stern. Appreciate you being with us, and hopefully hear again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senators. Absolutely the right question. I'm Hunter Stern. I'm with IBEW Local 1245, and also with CUE, Coalition of California Utility Employees. Our members work for those municipal utilities, as well as the investor-owned utilities here in California. We have about 40,000 members doing that work. So first and foremost, we have seen the need, lots of talk about transmission. We heartily agree. We have expanded our training programs to supply those workers. We have a new training center actually here in Woodland. We have expanded our existing training center in Riverside, and we have gone from roughly 300 people, 300 people in those training programs to over 1,000 by the end of the year. And we expect, as permitting and other issues are resolved on the transmission side, we will be producing over 1,000 apprentices annually by 2024, which is a big step in providing the workers needed to do this work. So that's first and foremost. We've heard a lot of positive things about transmission development and the need for more transmission. We completely agree. It's not just for work, it's to give everybody in the state access to this clean energy, which we can't do today. I won't repeat all the other comments. The other thing that we'll underscore, and this was also talked about by many of the speakers, is that need for what we call baseload clean energy. Geothermal was not mentioned. There have been concerns about cost. However, especially with the development and work in Lithium Valley and the capacity that's there geothermal-wise, as well as the extraction of lithium, we think that those two necessary technologies and work will produce lower cost and more affordable clean energy. Long-duration storage was just mentioned. It really is key. We support it in every variation. And of course, the IBEW more generally looks to work, as well as other building trades unions, works to help to build these kinds of projects, geothermal and long duration storage as well. So one thing I do want to mention that wasn't specifically mentioned that we also heartily support, it's the goal of a 15% spinning reserve. This is something that has been the standard in California and remains the standard, but we're having difficulty reaching it. The CPUC has identified this. We support this, again, 100%. It's ensuring that there's enough power on the grid and also deliverable to all residents and businesses. However we get there, and all the different ideas and concepts and technologies that were discussed, it's still, unfortunately, we've undermined or at least balkanized some of the procurement in the state. It's harder now to meet that spinning reserve. The CPUC does have a few tools, and I think they were mentioned previously, the central procurement. They also have the ability to fine load-serving entities who aren't contributing the what's known as resource adequacy, the product, not the concept. But fines obviously don't produce electricity. And this is an area, especially for our members who are serving customers and whose customers are upset when there is a rolling blackout. We really need to ensure that there is adequate resource adequacy and it's deliverable to everybody at all times. And these are principles and ideas that we strongly support. Thank you for the opportunity, and we look forward to engaging in the future.
Great, thank you very much. You hit a lot of our themes: long duration storage, baseload power. We were proud to put Lithium Valley in the state budget. There is 1 gigawatt of geothermal, as I understand, it's anticipated, so I do look forward to exploring that more as well. And I knew that getting more transmission would be music to your ears, and I look forward to visiting the training center. It's great to hear about that ramp up there. We will see no other speakers in the room. We'll move to the phone lines. We do have to be out of this room, unfortunately, at noon, but we'll move to the phone lines and ask people to keep their remarks to 1 minute and turn it over to the operator.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you wish to speak, please press 1, then 0 on your phone. Someone will give you a line number, and we will call on you as it's your turn. And we will start with line number 12. Please go ahead.
Hi,
line number 12. Yes, thank you.
Hello, my name is Ryan Biering, and I'm a 34-year-old clean energy professional from Berkeley, California. After working in California solar deployment for the last 12 years, I have witnessed firsthand the growing pains of the energy transition. Together with our allies in Europe, we have learned some hard truths about renewable energy like wind, water, solar, and storage. Thankfully, new data is revealing that baseload thermal generators like nuclear and geothermal are essential for grid reliability and affordability. At this time, California cannot afford to lose the 24/7 clean energy of Diablo Canyon power plant. To do so would be to risk the very stability of our republic. In May of this year, a representative from CAISO told a reporter at the LA Times the following, quote, "The past 2 summers have demonstrated that additional resources are needed to account for extreme conditions and supply delays which are not adequately captured in the traditional planning metrics," end quote. May 2nd, 2022. Diablo Canyon is the largest power plant in the state and can cover the gap that CAISO is warning us about. Despite the plans to close the plant in 2024-2025, experts have testified that the plant can operate as is an additional 40 years. The environmental stakes have never been higher. California law states we cannot increase emissions, yet this will certainly occur if we close Diablo and replace it with natural gas power plant production. The social impacts of Diablo Canyon Power Plant is immense. Given that the plant is fully paid for, it is the most affordable clean energy available in California today. This is essential to the viability of our state.
Thank you. We do have to move on and keep keep these limited, but thank you for your comment. Moderator, I should ask, how many folks are in the queue?
At this time, there are 17.
17. Okay, so we'll try to please ask folks to keep their comments brief, especially if someone's already mentioned what you wanted to say. If you could do a ditto, and we'll move on. Next comment, please.
Thank you. Next, we have line number 32. Please go ahead.
Clay. I'm a professor of physics at Cal Poly and a resident of San Luis Obispo. I'm a nuclear physicist by training, and I study nuclear collisions at both high and low energy so that we can better understand how the universe works and make nuclear reactor fuel more efficient. As a scientist, I base my decisions on facts, data, and evidence. And in the face of the overwhelming evidence of climate change and the urgent need for us to achieve net zero CO2 emissions as quickly as possible, I think we need to prioritize the preservation of Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant by clearing all pathways to relicensing and extension of this critical asset in our path to deep decarbonization. We must do everything we can to keep it open and operating into the future and invest in all clean energy generation, including new nuclear power plants. I think we have to lead the world by example. There's a demonstrated path of decarbonization, and we need to avoid the empty promises of 100% renewables advocates who ignore that parallel build-out of fossil fuel plants that are necessary to prop up the intermittency of wind and solar. I think the low-carbon electricity systems implemented in Sweden, Ontario, Canada, and France should light the way forward, and not the failed Energiewende of Germany.
Thank you. So I was going to have a physicist call in. We do have to move on. I apologize. Moderator will move to the next one.
Thank you. Next, we have line number 33. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Stephen Williams. I'm a retired software engineer and longtime resident of Santa Cruz, California. I just want to mention my support also for Diablo Canyon, and that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the International Energy Agency also say we need nuclear energy in the mix to be successful, as have the last 4 presidents of the United States and the current administration. So let's keep Diablo Canyon operating. It's the single largest energy source of clean energy in California. There's no good reason to shut it down. And I hope California also starts planning on deployment of advanced small reactors, as other states are already working on.
Okay, thank you. That was a new point, but I appreciate you mentioning that again. We'll just, please, if you name an organization, if you're reaffirming something that was already said, we're trying to keep comments to 15 or 30 seconds. Hopefully you enjoyed our Diablo testimony. Next speaker, please.
Thank you. Next, we have line number 28. Please go ahead.
Hi there, this is Eric Meyer from Generation Atomic. We're a grassroots pro-nuclear environmental nonprofit. Yes, I will echo the sentiments of the previous callers and also add on to the fact that we've been engaging with several agricultural associations about the prospect of using Diablo Canyon for desalination of seawater to help alleviate some of the water challenges. And there's a lot of support there. The 2021 late study last year from MIT and Stanford shows the potential of that. So please think about water as well as when we're thinking about energy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Thank you. Next, we have line 35. Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jim Hoff. I'm a policy lead at Generation Atomic that Eric mentioned. I'm also here to advocate for the continued operation of Diablo Canyon. Diablo Canyon will be essential for maintaining grid reliability while meeting California's climate commitments. Steady, reliable power, especially during, say, the late evening when demand is high but solar has quit, will greatly reduce the cost of meeting our climate goals while maintaining reliability by greatly reducing the necessary amount of storage. We're hearing that there's an 1,800 megawatt shortage by 2025. The simple act of keeping Diablo open would just eliminate that shortfall. If we want to make progress on climate, we can't afford to replace one non-emitting source with another. To make progress, renewables need to replace fossil fuels instead. Fossil fuels are still 50% of California.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry, we have to keep moving. Next speaker, please.
Next, we have line number 38. Please go ahead.
Oh, also, I want to remind people that, and if we do cut you off, I apologize, you can submit written testimony as well. I did want to remind folks of that option. Next speaker.
Line 38, your line is open.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Allie Ditrio with the Microgrid Resources Coalition. Thanks for the hearing today. I just want to underscore some things that the presenter said today about price signals being needed and clear tariffs for projects like microgrids, which can provide dispatchable capacity and help alleviate our reliability challenge and meet the net peak period, can really help address a lot of these issues if we have the price signals and clear tariffs and market signals to help us monetize the resources. And as someone said earlier about streamlining the programs, there's such a hodgepodge. We can have one clear tariff and price signal for grid services, firm capacity, and resilience for communities. That is the way that we can meet all of our resilience and reliability goals with microgrids. I'll submit written comments to help shorten the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Thank you. Next, we have line 43. Please go ahead.
Hi, Chair and members. This is Igor Tregup with the California Solar and Storage Association. We represent over 720 members, most of them small businesses, and 65,000 workers in distributed solar and storage. And I just wanted to uplift many of the things that were mentioned. We need more solar, not less. We need more batteries, not less. And to realize our shared clean energy future, we need to do more with the solar and batteries. We also need to strengthen policies that allow for batteries and virtual power plants to support grid reliability. Nearly two-thirds of the distributed solar being adopted in recent years has been in working and middle-class neighborhoods. Over the past decade, our members have built out among the highest amount of solar capacity for multifamily housing in the communities most adversely impacted by pollution, counties such as Fresno, Riverside, and San Bernardino, as well as LA County. As a Ukraine native, this is existentially important to me and my family. Thank you so much for everything you are doing to speed up the transition towards a democratized, renewable, 100% clean energy source.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Thank you. Next, we have line 36. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. Priscilla Quiros here on behalf of the Western Propane Gas Association, known as WPGA. WPGA is pleased that the legislature is taking seriously the challenge of providing reliable energy to California consumers as the state moves towards a carbon-neutral future. We're also pleased that the committee recognized this dispatchable generation using low-carbon, zero-carbon fuels can provide an immediate solution to the needs of residential, commercial, agricultural, and industrial consumers. We want to point out that propane gas already provides a vastly decreased GHG footprint of diesel and natural fuels, in addition of being highly portable. Already parts of the state are disconnected from natural gas pipelines or are in areas frequently affected by public safety power shutoffs. Use propane to reliably provide heat and power. In addition, the propane industry is investing heavily into renewable propane gas that will provide drastically reduced carbon intensity fuels for the future. Derived from entirely sustainable sources such as agricultural and municipal waste, renewable propane can provide Californians with even cleaner fuel with an extremely smaller carbon footprint. Our industry and its thousands of well-paid employees across California are working closely to develop less carbon intensity renewable propane, developing new technologies and feedstocks to further achieve California's climate goals.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's submit the rest in writing. Appreciate it. Thank you. Next speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have line number 51. Please go ahead.
Hello?
Hello? Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Leslie Purcell calling. I'm just calling to support not extending Diablo Canyon. I don't think that we actually need it. And we do need more solar, local generation, and more battery storage. We have so many opportunities for solar with municipal parking lots and roofs and commercial and industrial sites as well that I think we need to really push that and to have the battery storage and the backup from that. Goleta has recently instituted its municipal solar project, and they're powering their city hall with their own local generation. We need to have more of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have line 45. Please go ahead.
Members of the committee, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm Scott Lipton, Energy Policy Manager with Enchanted Rock, an electricity resiliency as a service company operating nationally and here in California. As Seha and EDF illustrated earlier today, diesel backup generation has increased 34% over the past 3 years and accounts for 12.2 gigawatts of capacity in the South Coast and Bay Area air quality districts alone. 1 in 4 backup diesel generation sites is cited within the 80th to 100th percentile of Cal EnviroScreen communities, those communities that can least afford, from a public health perspective, to have these facilities in their midst. The committee's focus today on clean power grid reliability is important. California's policies in the near term to ensure grid reliability and resiliency should focus on and support the proliferation of customer-focused electrical solutions that can simultaneously be dispatched to the broader grid as needs arise. These policies, in our view, should support technology.
Thank you for your comment. Very important. We'll take one more comment. I apologize. We need to wrap up. We need to vacate the room. This will be the last comment. The others, sorry. Thank you for waiting. Please submit your comments in writing. So, moderator, we'll take one more. Yeah, one more.
All right, thank you. Next, we have line number 14. Please go ahead. Line number 14, your line is open.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Wonderful. This is Claire Broom. I'm a professor of public health. In answer to Senator Stern's question, there is, PUC estimates that there is 2,400 megawatts of demand flexibility that can be available, which will more per year, which will more than fill the 1,800 gap. Furthermore, putting batteries and demand flexibility on the distribution grid gets away from these shutoffs due to failed transmission lines. I beseech you to recognize, first of all, Diablo Canyon was useless in the 2020 outages because CAISO had to hold large reserves to guard against the possibility that Diablo would fail. Investing in batteries and demand flexibility provides flexible, rapidly responsive, modular power instead of one large, inflexible nuclear plant, which cannot meet Nuclear Regulatory Commission's tsunami avoidance. I also suggest oversight of the PUC.
I appreciate your comment. Please wrap up. This is the final comment. Please wrap up. Thank you.
Sure. Avoid the transmission access charge, which penalizes local generation on community solar. So thanks for all you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you all to individuals who called in and participated in public testimony today. If you're not able to testify via the teleconference service, please submit your comments or suggestions in writing to the Senate Committee on Energy, Utilities, and Communications Subcommittee on Clean Energy Future, or visit our website. Your comments and suggestions are important to us. We got many good ones. We want to include your point of view in the official hearing and your testimony in the official hearing records, which it will be if you write in. Thank you. We appreciate your participation. Thank you for your patience and cooperations to everyone. We've concluded the agenda. The Senate Committee on Energy, Utilities, and Communications Subcommittee on Clean Energy Future is adjourned.